We live in a world of extraordinary abundance and extraordinary inequality. The gap between those at the very top of the economic ladder and everyone else is not an accident of nature. It is the result of systems, choices, and structures that can be understood, challenged, and redesigned. This presentation is a blueprint, a guide to bridging the wealth gap through sustainable, regenerative business practices. Let's begin by briefly examining the wealth gap itself. Here's a fundamental truth about wealth that most people are never taught. It isn't primarily built through wages, it's built through assets. Property and stocks appreciate in value over time. Those who own assets see their wealth compound automatically. Those who rely on wages, however, are subject to the rising cost of living, with little left over to build financial security. This creates a powerful divergence. Because assets grow faster than wages, those who start with assets naturally accumulate more over time. The result? In the United States today, the wealthiest 160,000 families hold as much wealth as the bottom 145 million families combined. That's not a typo. That is the asset engine at work.
How do economists actually measure inequality? One method is the Gini coefficient, a simple but powerful tool. Think of it as a thought experiment. If two random people met on the street, what would we expect the difference between their incomes to be? A score of 0 means perfect equality. Everyone earns the same. A score of 1 means a single person receives all the income. The United States scores 0.74, a reflection of narrow asset concentration at the top. Slovakia, by contrast, scores just 0.38, driven by broad-based asset ownership and strong social safety nets. Using tools like the Gini coefficient, economists can track exactly how resources are, or are not, being distributed across society.
Our economic circumstances don't just affect our bank accounts. They shape how we think and how we relate to others. Research shows that high levels of wealth create independence. When individuals can meet all their needs without relying on others, they naturally develop less need to read emotional cues. Over time, this physical and social distance reduces baseline empathy. On the other side, economic vulnerability requires interdependence. When you depend on your community for safety and support, you become highly attuned to the needs and emotions of those around you. Perhaps most striking is what researchers call the monopoly effect. When study participants were given random, unearned advantages in a game of Monopoly, within just 15 minutes, they exhibited dominant, low empathy behavior, and they attributed their success entirely to their own skill.
At the heart of today's dominant economic model is a simple three-step process: extract, consume, discard. Value is extracted from natural resources, labor, and local communities, primarily for short-term financial enrichment. Wealth is removed from the community. The method is to treat both environmental elements and human labor as expendable inputs to minimize costs. But here's the critical problem. This linear model exhausts the very conditions it needs to survive. Healthy soil, stable social structures, clean water, these aren't infinite. When they're depleted, the entire system becomes fragile. Extractive capitalism focuses on short-term gains for a few, at the cost of long-term catastrophic risk for the community.
The most important idea for all of us to understand is that the economy, our economy, is not a fixed law of nature. The economy is a system designed by human beings, and that means it can be redesigned. To close the wealth gap and ensure long-term sustainability, we must move from passively accepting extractive capitalism to actively designing a restorative economic order. There are 6 structural pillars needed to bridge the wealth gap and establish a sustainable future. These are concrete, evidence-based remedies grounded in peer-reviewed research.
The first remedy is foundational. developing the capacity to truly see one another across the economic divide. Social empathy goes beyond individual compassion. It means understanding others within the context of the structural barriers and institutional systems that shape their lives. It means suspending judgment in favor of compassion. Bridging the psychological distance between economic groups requires deep awareness of the different realities and challenges faced by each group. Research confirms that when policymakers genuinely witness and internalize the lived experiences of the broader citizen class, their support for policies promoting sustainable economic equity organically increases. Shared context is the bridge between people. Without it, the gap in understanding reflects and amplifies the gap in wealth.
The second remedy requires businesses to fundamentally rethink their relationship with the world around them. Asking how we can do less harm is a great start, but sadly, this is no longer enough to create a sustainable future. Regenerative business asks a bolder question. How do we actively restore and build natural and social capital? This model operates in a cycle of regeneration, not the traditional linear conveyor belt of extraction. Inspired by biomimicry, it designs industrial processes to mimic natural cycles, where waste is minimized and materials are continuously reused. And through stakeholder purpose, a firm's inner values are aligned with the outer needs of its community, ensuring that capital circulates within communities rather than being extracted away. Business, community, and environment become a single, interconnected system.
One of the most direct ways to close the wealth gap is to widen the circle of ownership. Programs like Ownership Works advocate for expanding stock ownership to all employees, from the executive suite to the front lines. By providing broad-based equity grants, workers gain access to the same asset appreciation cycle that has historically benefited only the wealthy few. And the benefits aren't one-sided. When workers hold a tangible stake in the business, research shows that organizational cohesion improves, employee engagement rises, and regional economic stability increases. Inclusive ownership isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. Changes in individual and corporate behavior only go so far. The fourth remedy requires us to fix the rules of the game themselves. First, updating the tax code. Treating income equally, for example, taxing capital gains at the same rate as personal wages, prevents the disproportionate accumulation of unearned wealth that drives the gap wider every year. Second, strengthening competition. Reforming antitrust law to address not only monopolies, but the outsized power of large employers over workers ensures markets remain efficient and fair. The goal is straightforward: restoring a balanced market environment where the benefits of economic growth are broadly and fairly shared by everyone who contributes to creating it. Economic security doesn't rest on one pillar. It rests on three. The first is education and training, moving from transactional to transformational pedagogies, building direct, reliable pipelines from learning into sustainable employment, so that achievement, not zip code, determines opportunity. The second is affordable housing, ensuring that baseline living costs do not outpace localized wage growth, so that working families can actually build stable and secure lives. The third is public spaces, investing in shared green spaces and community centers that build trust and social capital across different demographics. These spaces may seem soft compared to tax policy, but research shows they are essential. Communities with strong social infrastructure are more cohesive, more resilient, and better able to weather economic disruption.
The sixth and final remedy addresses something that is rarely discussed in economic policy: the psychological damage caused by the citizens' lack of voice and agency in employment. Research on learned helplessness shows that chronic job insecurity and lack of control lead workers to believe their actions have no impact on outcomes. This feeling of powerlessness doesn't stay at work. It spills over into civic life, producing political apathy and disengagement. The antidote is co-determination, giving workers genuine voice in company operations and strategic planning. When people practice democratic decision-making on the job, they carry those civic skills into the broader society, becoming more active, more engaged, and more invested in the world around them. A participatory workplace is ultimately a school for democracy.
For too long, we have measured the health of our economy with a single instrument: financial profit. But a single gauge is not enough to navigate a complex system. A restorative economy requires a multi-capital dashboard, 4 gauges measured simultaneously. Financial capital? Yes, still important. But alongside it, natural capital, the health of our ecosystems; social capital, the quality of our communities and trust networks; and human capital, the well-being and capability of the people within the system. True economic health requires growing all 4. And the new benchmark for success? A net positive impact on the planet, high levels of social trust, robust human well-being, and stable financial returns. Not 1 or 2, all 4, together.
Let's bring it all together in one clarifying framework. Capitalism is not a single fixed thing. It exists on a continuum, from the extractive model at one end to the regenerative model at the other. The extractive model prioritizes short-term financial return, uses resources in a linear take-make-waste design, concentrates ownership at the top, and produces security for the few and precarity for the many. The regenerative model prioritizes long-term systemic stability, operates in circular resource flows that reuse, restore, and replenish, distributes ownership broadly, and produces interdependence and shared security for everyone. This is not utopian thinking. Countries and companies around the world are already operating closer to the regenerative end of this spectrum. The question is not whether it is possible. It is whether we will make the commitment for a sustainable, equitable future for all Americans.
The wealth gap is not inevitable. It is not a law of physics. It is a design problem, and design problems have design solutions. By shifting away from extractive practices, by cultivating social empathy, by building regenerative businesses, by expanding ownership, by reforming institutions, by strengthening social infrastructure, and by creating truly participatory workplaces, we can build an economy defined not by how much wealth is concentrated at the top, but by how broadly prosperity is shared. Every human being has the potential to contribute to and share in created abundance. The path forward requires a collective decision to reject the idea that people and nature are expendable and to embrace a future built on interdependence and mutual security. The bridge can be built. The blueprint is here.